So, for those of you who I haven't met, I'm Brian McMath, current executive administrator at the Texas Water Development Board. I've been in this role for going on 10 months and previously did government relations. So, many of you know me from that role. And I am super excited, kind of a bonus of my current role, to introduce this next group of amazing people. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Sarah Schlessinger. She is the CEO of the Texas Water Foundation, and she's going to kick off our film panel. I'll let her introduce our two stars of the show. But before that, we have an additional star who would like to say a quick hello. So, without any further ado, all right, take it away.
Is a land of mystery and legend, incredibly vast and diverse. It's where the Rocky Mountains give way to the Great Plains, and where the forests of the Deep South converge with the Blackland Prairie. From the spring-fed rivers that bless the hill country to the tropical forests of the Rio Grande Valley, Texas gives life to animals found nowhere else and attracts migrations from across the hemisphere. From our headwater springs to the Gulf of Mexico, it is a land sculpted by water, where nature has selected for the most adaptable, and to those willing to stake their claim. For the very first time, this film will celebrate the natural wonders of Texas. It is a story about tragedies in our past, of recoveries against all odds, and is a call to action to conserve the wildlife and wild places in our home. This is a story for all who love Texas.
Good afternoon. Can y'all hear me? All right. Let's do another big round of applause for that amazing trailer. Have you ever watched a documentary that changed the way that you saw the world? Maybe that scared you or inspired you? And storytelling has always been powerful. It's the way that we teach our children between right and wrong. It's how we catalog and remember history. It's about how we learn what we care about and what we don't care about, and we make decisions every day based off of storytelling. So I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. That's right. It's going to feel weird, but we're in Austin. You're going to be okay. I want you to think about being in school. You're 10 or 11 years old. You're sitting at your desk and you're squirming, probably because you're sitting at a conference with your eyes closed, but also probably because you forgot to do that history homework. And then all of a sudden the door opens and a substitute teacher walks in and rolls in that TV. And then you know you're off the hook for homework. Well, friends, we've just rolled in the TV to the water conference so everybody can take a deep breath. Today's luncheon keynote is about storytelling. It's about watching some films together and some philosophical musings with the brilliant people who make them. And so it is my great privilege to be able to introduce my good friends, my colleagues, and iconic Texas filmmakers, Ben Masters and Jay Kleberg. Let's give them a big round of applause.
You cool, me.
At a time when the story we tell about water is crucial, um, I think it's important that we start at the beginning of your story to learn a little bit about how the work that you're doing is weaving a new future, a new story for Texas. So I would describe both of you as, of course, Texas filmmakers, but you are also conservationists and scientists and storytellers and deeply interested in what it is that is the Texas story. So Ben, you're panhandle raised with a wildlife biology degree from Texas A&M. Oh, on cue. How'd you start making films? Why?
Um, Audio check. There you go. Okay. Hi, my name's Ben Masters. Thank you for having me here, and very proud of the movie that you guys watched the trailer for. That's Deep in the Heart, my first blue chip natural history film. I hatched that idea with this fellow right here floating down the Rio Grande a few years ago, and turned out a lot better than we expected it to. I'm from Amarillo, and went to Texas A&M, studied wildlife biology, and I got into film because I couldn't get into grad school. No. My sophomore year, I kind of got tired of school, and I ended up training horses, and I got introduced to the wild horse dilemma out west, and ended up hatching an idea with some friends where we adopted 16 wild Mustangs from the Bureau of Land Management, and then we trained them, and then we rode from Mexico to Canada. And that took about 5 months or so, and we filmed it, and we made a movie called Unbranded. And it did a lot better than anybody expected it to. And through that film, we were able to get several thousand horses adopted, which I'm immensely proud of. And that opened my eyes into the power of film. You know, I think it's the only opportunity where most of us in our lives sit down for 90 minutes and turn off our phones, and we don't talk to the people around us, and we get totally absorbed with, you know, the pictures and stories in front of us. And that film Unbranded opened up, you know, storytelling, and wildlife is very important to me. You know, I grew up in a farming and ranching family where I was outside most of the time, and really got to learn, you know, about soil health and water from my dad and grandfather and my family, and studied wildlife at Texas A&M. And then I've had the immense honor to make 20 or 30 so short films here in Texas about different conservation issues, which are always people issues, and then different wildlife stories, and made Deep in the Heart with Jay here, and that released in 2022. And Matthew McConaughey was kind enough to lend us his voice. He did a fantastic narration performance, and we released it, and the film did really well. No surprise there. Texans love Texas. I don't know if y'all knew that or not, but immensely proud of the movie. And, you know, while we made that film, I got to meet Sarah, and she was one of our consultants on how do you tell the story of Texas water, because you can't tell the story of Texas wildlife without telling the story of Texas water. So pleasure to meet you. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Ben. And I heard one of those earlier cuts where you were the stand-in for Matthew McConaughey, and he does a good Matthew McConaughey. So Jay, you are first and foremost a conservationist and has been involved in so many important work in Texas. You've got a background in ecotourism, Texas Parks and Wildlife Foundation. Recently, you were a nominee for the Texas Land Commissioner office. How'd you end up as a filmmaker? Can you tell us that story?
Well, it's something that is it on? How about that?
There you go.
Yeah. Well, I gotta tell one quick backstory. So Ben and I were on the Rio Grande, and we were talking about this idea of, you know, this is such an amazing river and part of the state and the country. What if we exposed Texans to all these other ecoregions? And the first name for that film was Planet Texas. And we had to kind of back down off of that, so that's how we got to Deep in the Heart. But I grew up on a ranch in South Texas.
Or just a little ranch, right?
the King Ranch.
Specifically. Okay, just making sure.
Yeah. And those of y'all that have been there or know about it, it's sort of its own, there are multiple ecosystems, obviously, but I think about it as an ecosystem. You've got livestock, you've got agriculture, you have wildlife, you have all these natural resources, and everybody's working together towards this, common goal. And so I went to school, ultimately ended up in graduate school here at UT. And I realized that my passion was in natural resources, and somehow I wanted to combine those. And so I ended up working for the Grand Canyon National Park, and we did a business plan for them. And then I ended up getting a job at Parks and Wildlife Foundation. And I realized that there are all these incredible stories and scientists and projects. And we really were trying to raise awareness for not just the foundation, but really for all these great things going on in Texas. And I met Ben, and he invited me to a screening of Unbranded in downtown Austin at the Paramount. And I remember walking in, and it was packed. And there were all of these people, all different ages and interests. There were horse people. There were people that were interested in wildlife. There were people that knew Ben, et cetera. And I thought, man, this is powerful. A lot of what he was talking about, where you've got people's attention, but also you're forced as a filmmaker to tell a story in 15, 20, 45 minutes, 60 minutes. And then we decided to tour around the state for a few years, and we did the Wild Texas Film Tour. And we had people showing up, 200, 500. And at the end of it, you end up reaching 5,000, 10,000 people and having a real engagement. It's not just they're watching TV, they're at an event. And that's kind of what got me into it. You realize the power, not just of storytelling, but of that medium.
So we're going to watch a little bit more of the work. So let's talk about the work, and let's talk about water specifically. I'm a little bit biased, but I think that there's a strong through line on water in a lot of your work. So let's go back to Deep in the Heart, and just so that it's clear, you said it came out, Ben, what year?
22.
22. How long did it take you to make it?
3 years.
3 years, and Jay was the producer on it.
Yeah.
Correct. So the trailer that you watched at the beginning, Deep in the Heart, is Texas's first wildlife documentary. Or, for those that are uninitiated, I describe it as, what's the name of that?
Oh, yeah.
Planet Earth for Texas. If you haven't seen it, you need to see it. It's extraordinary. I want to talk a little bit about how you decided to frame it, because I remember in those early conversations, you said you wanted to follow the path of water in the way that and I know that you went through different wildlife ecologies, but can you tell me a little bit more, Ben, about how it is that you wove water into it and why that was important?
Well, I think growing up in the Panhandle, you're very conscious of water. We have some of the most spectacular storms that exist up there in the plains. And then the Ogallala is the driving force of the economy of the Texas Panhandle region. And, from an early age, they teach you to look for cottonwood trees if you ever get lost, because that means water, and water is life. And I think, all those folks in East Texas take it for granted how precious and wonderful it is. But with Deep in the Heart, that film follows two storylines. One is our evolving relationship with wildlife beginning in the 1800s, leading up to current day. The good, the bad, the ugly. There's a lot we can be proud of and a lot of work to
Reason
do.
for hope as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And then the other kind of storyline in that film is the course of water from our headwater springs through the creeks, into the aquifers, out to the bays and estuaries, and then eventually all the way out into the Gulf of Mexico, and just kind of showing how that nutrients gets passed on from, one ecosystem to the next.
And so, Jay, I remember distinctly that one of the things that was extraordinary about the rollout of Deep in the Heart is that you were really interested in how you were going to measure impact, how it was going to get into classrooms. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've seen, what you did to make sure that it was being seen by the people it needed to be seen by?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we learned from the first feature that we did was it was really hard to measure impact. beyond screenings and you get awards and all of that stuff. But if somebody asks you, okay, that's cool, but what kind of an impact did it have? What did it do? It was hard to say. And we really wanted to have a measurable impact. And so we tied curriculum to the film. And we were able to measure that in terms of how many educators and how many kids could we extrapolate based on the number of downloads. And so we estimate about 400,000 kids in the state of Texas have downloaded Texas-specific TEKS-aligned Next Generation Science Standard curriculum. And so we can measure it that way. And then obviously you've got screenings. Ben, kind of midway, I would say, said, distribution's a really tough thing. And so why don't we just do it ourselves? So we'll make it super hard. We're going to shoot this during the pandemic. We're going to try and raise money during the pandemic. And then we're going to try and roll it out in, nearly 100 theaters, which the team was able to do. And we were able to show it to 50,000 people. It ended up getting on Fox Nation. We did a book. So there are all these like measurement points. But honestly, this sounds like really cheesy, but
Wait honest.
yeah. With all these films, when you come across someone who says, hey, I watched your film and I went to the Big Ben because of you, or my kid got really interested in blind salamanders, or we went to Bracken, or the numbers are great. It's great for funders and it's great for things like this. But when you hear about that personal connection and it like maybe changed a few people's lives, and honestly, like I was a Mutual of Omaha Wild Kingdom kid, and I wanted to see that about my state, and I think we did it, and I think it makes a lot of kids, especially that don't have the means to go see those places, a way to create that kind of love for their state.
So I'm guessing it was really important that you got Matthew McConaughey's the narrator. So Brian wants to know, how'd you pull that off, Ben?
I just called his agent and asked him if he'd do it and sent him some sample reel. Matthew was like, hell yeah. Hey, on September 15th. And I was like, all right, that's great. Let's do it then. And he was real nice to work with. He delivered the entire performance in a little under 4 hours. And it was one of those deals where he'd deliver a line and he'd be like, how's that? Does that work? And I'll be like, yeah, I don't think that can be improved. Let's move on. And I mean, he's amazing. And he did a great job. And yeah, it's just a very different viewing experience than hearing some proper Englishman describing the African gazelle. And there's like,
Now you're throwing shade against.
McConaughey like digging on Oklahoma.
Tell him real quick about the first recording, and that he didn't really have everything. It's during a pandemic, right? And so he's remote. He's not in Austin. He's not in the United States. And you want me to finish?
I don't know. So
We had edited a studio, and as you can imagine, like we have everything completed. This is the final piece, is his voice. The whole project, this is $1.5 million project, is banking on Matthew McConaughey doing this in 4 hours. So we go into the production studio here in Austin, get everything lined up. We're there unusually like 30 minutes early, get everything checked. And Stuck On, if you've heard them on NPR, they support the local radio station. Anyway, so Matthew comes on, he's like, hey guys, and he's kind of walking around and stuff. He's on Zoom. He's like wearing a t-shirt and stuff. Like, didn't seem like he had it all together. He's like, hey, I can't, my radio technician is not here. He is not in the United States. My radio technician's not here. Do you mind if I just do this on my phone? And we put it on mute, block out the video. We spent like $50,000 on audio solely for Matthew McConaughey. We were like, whatever you do, Ben, make sure that we convince him to do this right now and not on his phone. And he's like, hey, I did this for Sing 2, all of that on my audio phone, on my phone. We're like, no, you can't do that. And he finally got everything hooked up, but
Well,
He did a great job.
we thank him and Zoom for their service to water. So Ben, you've been working on Deep in the Heart too.
I have.
The story there.
Well, Deep in the Heart 1 was very successful and people liked it. And a lot of our internal team members and audiences said, let's do it again. And so we're doing Deep in the Heart 2, which is a Texas River story. And Deep in the Heart 1 was a Texas wildlife story, and it focused on our relationship with wildlife. And Deep in the Heart 2 is a Texas River story, and it focuses on our relationship with water and our evolving relationship with water and kind of how the Texas hydrologic system works, how our aquifers feed the rivers and the springs, the influences that, our society has had on water, the things that we're doing really well, the opportunities that we have, and then the big thing, which is, this shared parallel that we have between, our society's health as well as the natural health of Texas, which, pretty much all the wildlife and all the communities and our economy, everything is really tied up in the well-being of water. So no pressure, y'all, but if you screw it up, there's going to be a lot of folks really pissed off.
Well, we look forward to seeing that. And so, Jay, separate from Deep in the Heart, you just released your first PBS documentary series called Chasing the Tide to tell a very different water story about Texas and about our wild and scenic coast. But you did walk the 370 miles of the Texas coast. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep.
What'd you see?
Still married.
Still married. So, Jay, what'd you see?
Man. Well, first off, the idea started in a bar in Mexico City.
Of course.
With my wife. And I was about to start a new job as the executive director of a coastal conservation organization. And I'd done some work on the mid-coast, and I grew up on Baffin Bay, but I didn't know a whole lot about the Chenier Plain or the Galveston area or even some of that area south near Boca Chica. And I thought, what better way to do that than to actually walk all of it? And if we're going to do that, then why don't we document it? And I happened to be in a meeting with Austin PBS. It was unplanned, and it wasn't about this project. They were asking my advice as a filmmaker, and I was like, man, they're going to find out pretty quick that I don't know what I'm talking about. And so we get to the end of the meeting, and the CEO says, hey, have you heard of any projects? Like anything interesting out there? And I was like, well, and I sort of soft pitched him, I was like, well, I got this idea, we're going to do it, and there's all these different topics, but I don't know. I mean, distribution and all of that. He's like, no, this sounds cool. Why don't you come back, a month from now with a team and give us a pitch and all that stuff? And so we did. A lot of friends that Ben and I have worked with before and pitched it, and they said, yeah, do it. And it was just you asked me what we found, and so I'm not answering your question, but it's such an afterthought for so many Texans. And all of us in this room, I think, realize that we live in a coastal state, but we do not think of ourselves as a coastal state. Everything that we do here in Austin, whether it's related to water or how we're developing in and around or what we do in terms of our conservation efforts, whether it's in Abilene or in Amarillo, wherever you are, everything drains to the Gulf. And so we really wanted to get that point across. And, even though Texas has 10 ecoregions, a lot of those ecoregions end up touching the Gulf. And about every, 20 to 50 miles, it changes. And then on top of that, you have these incredible communities that are there that I would argue different from the rest of the northern Gulf states. There's just so much character there in all of these little towns, in Surfside and Galveston and Port O'Connor and all these other places. And so we wanted to see it for ourselves. And I have to tell you, two times now in the last 2 months, 12-year-old kids, we've been giving presentations. One was on the walk, and then the other one was about a week ago. They raised their hand and said, why did you walk it? It's like, oh my God, you're right. Why did I walk it? Why didn't we drive that thing, I thought it was an honest question.
But an interesting question, because you walked it so that you were going slow enough to see the small things.
That's right. Totally. And one thing I remember, I was working with Parks and Wildlife Foundation. We were looking to acquire some land at Matagorda Peninsula. And I remember we popped out over the dunes onto the Gulf side. And one, I was just like, wow, this is incredible. It's sort of like the world opens up. Two, there was a washer and dryer and there was a tire sitting on the beach. So just kind of eye-opening, like, oh, this is incredible. And, you know, there's some realities here. But walking it and filming it and doing all of that and then doing the research, as we found with Deep in the Heart and these other films, is like, you have to become, you're not an expert. And that's why we brought all these people on, especially the guy that got dressed in Surfside in his corduroy jacket. But that's who you want to elevate, right, is those people. But there's a lot of work that goes into the prep.
So you mentioned earlier you're the executive director of a new nonprofit, relatively new at this point, called the Gulf of Mexico Trust, and that this initiative was very much intertwined with that. Can you tell us a little bit about what that nonprofit does and why this work mattered?
Yeah. So the organization was born out of really some folks associated with Heart Research Institute for Gulf of Mexico Studies out of A&M Corpus Christi. Does A&M Corpus Christi get a whoop? No. Well, no.
We're like a
and really this idea, which I think y'all are probably familiar with, is you have the science, you've got the policy, you've got implementation, and a lot of times at the research level, the implementation part is just hard to do, right? Like you identify the problem, but then you really have to rely on other organizations to pick that up and say, okay, we're going to tackle oyster mariculture, or we're going to tackle freshwater inflow, or, you know, you sort of have to like let your baby go. And in this instance, the Gulf of Mexico Trust was formed to really tackle some of these like multidimensional problems, two of which I just mentioned. Illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing is another. So we've got the equivalent of an annual commercial catch of shark that's being illegally caught out of the Laguna Madre in that Boca Chica area. And then the annual recreational catch for red snapper. And then on top of that, it's being sold back to us in the United States. So these are like some touchy issues. There's some organizations that may not want to mess around with the cartel. And so we're trying to tackle some of these issues. And this was a way to sort of get real up to speed. And then what I learned with Deep in the Heart was we had 20 conservation organizations that we brought into that effort to tell us what they knew, but also to help us to raise awareness for the film and all these topics. And this helped in that way. It's like, hey, I'm just here to learn. And then it's a good icebreaker too. When you tell somebody that you just walked 370 miles, they're like, oh, that's cool. So it served multiple purposes.
Thank you.
drive.
So you told a really good story to bring it to the surface. So Ben, looking slightly outside of Texas, you've also been working on another really big film about the mighty Colorado River.
The other Colorado River.
Yeah, the Colorado River. Where was that story born?
So Deep in the Heart came out, and I had a handful of folks want me to do something similar with feature film in the American Southwest, focusing around the Colorado River. And we started filming that in 2022, fall of 22, and it has a elk story, a salmon fly story, a cutthroat trout story, a condor story, a Mojave rattlesnake story, and a saguaro cactus story, and some of the coolest jaguar footage from the Arizona borderlands. It's really cool. And we're going to come out with that in August. And I have to say that compared to the Colorado River Basin, we're doing really good. You know, we always talk about like the sanctity of water, how it brings life, and you don't really know the worth of water until it's gone. And I went to the Colorado River Delta in Mexico, and, you know, 100 years ago, there was this huge 2 million acre wetland with semi-tropical rainforests and big trees and wetlands and fish. And I mean, it is gone. And it is just like this huge 2 million acre dust bowl. And they've literally, between those 7 states, California being the worst one, they've drained that whole river dry to where there is not a single drop of water that makes it to the sea. It hadn't been for decades. And that really sunk home to me of, how precarious it is, and how, Texas, Mahomes, I've kind of taken it for granted that he can always go down to the quad and fly fish for a bass, or go up to the Canadian and float down, or even go out to Big Bend and float the river. And, I was out in Big Bend a few weeks ago and went to St. Helena Canyon. We were going to go float the river. And there was 15 CFS, and the 4th largest, river in North America. It was drained dry. It's dang New Mexicans.
Now, Ben.
But it can happen here too, and that should be avoided at all costs. Texas is a better place with water in the rivers and with springs coming out of the hills.
Sure.
And just seeing, what it can become. That was really a moment of clairvoyance for me.
How many of you want to book your weekend just to watch films? Let's hope this ring keeps up. All right, as we move into this final section, I want to ask you some big philosophical musings. What's the hardest part of telling a story about water? And how have you balanced the complexity of the science and the technical with having an emotional hook? Jay?
Me.
Yeah, you.
Mine may not be as philosophical as Ben's. We ended up sitting down with the UT Bureau of Economic Geology and really looking at the hydrology of the Colorado watershed. Because this is kind of my job. I'm not a water professional, but I am in conservation. So I generally know how aquifers and recharge and surface water and all that stuff works. But I've never really visualized it. And we happen to be at an event for my daughter at Redbud. And at Redbud, they have a profile of the Colorado River watershed. And so I called a couple of people, LCRA, and they said, you need to go to BEG. So we sat down with them. We're like, all right, explain this to us, including Robert Mays. And it's like, okay, we're going to have to visualize this for people and show them how from the Playa Lakes all the way down to the where the Colorado River comes out, what that looks like and how many straws are going into the ground between the Playa Lakes and the bays and estuaries. And so for me, it was visual because we did some of that with Deep in the Heart. And I wanted to hammer it home again in that everything that happens up here and in the middle, it affects other things, wildlife and life and industries, hundreds of miles away. And so for me, it was I had to tell that visually in order for people to kind of really understand, oh, wow, okay, so that's how it all works, and it's how what I do here makes a difference.
So what I hear is it's the scale of it.
Yeah.
Being able to represent the scale of how it's all connected.
And the interconnectedness, yeah.
Ben, what about you? What's the hardest part about telling a water story?
I think that as a person that really cares deeply for wildlife, just seeing the amount of change that's happened over the last 100 years, sometimes you can kind of get angry at it. I look at the Colorado River Compact that was made in the year 1922, and they didn't leave a single drop of water for the entire river. And they also miscalculated the amount of water by 4 million acre feet. And it's easy to kind of get mad at it and be like, you know what, that's a terrible system. And I think that that's a folly that many, people within media, especially with environmentalists, make is, it's easy to point out the wrongs, but it's a lot more difficult to try to figure out what to do going forward. And, if you look back at the year 1922, they were just making the best decisions that they could with the information that they had. and the values that they had at the time. And I feel like whenever it comes to water policy, and maybe with a lot of government agency policies, you know, you look back and if you try to like study it closely, they're just trying to make good decisions. And, you know, they've built this tremendous amount of infrastructure that, you know, none of us were even alive for. And if we were going to build it today, we'd probably, you know, build it differently and use different information. And, you know, nobody would have expected that there'd be, what is it, 45 million Texans that, or, you know,
It's just over 30 right now, I think. But we're growing. Dr. Potter said we're growing.
yeah. And then, you know, Colorado River Basin, there's like 40 million people that are like, nobody who planned the water system planned for that. And now we've kind of inherited this infrastructure that's built off of, you know, 100-year-old values and information, and we're trying to make do with it. And I think, you know, for me, getting into water policy, coming into it from like a wildlife perspective, you know, I kind of had this feeling like, you know, the big bad government's screwing up all of our rivers. And now I've come to realize how fragile it is for humankind as well. And it's scary, you know, because it's like whenever I went to the Colorado River Delta, it broke my heart to see a 2 million acre wetland that was gone. But it was also scary because, you know, those communities that live down there, they're gone. And, you know, to see firsthand what it looks like, you know, the wildlife is the bellwether, but it's human society that falls next. Like nobody wants to live on a river that doesn't have any water in it. Nobody wants to grow crops in the Panhandle if there's no Ogallala. Like you can't. And it saddens me to think that, you know, my hometown in Amarillo, like we can't irrigate anymore. We can't afford to get water out of the ground. And, you know, that happened over the course of one person's lifetime. And I think for me as a storyteller, trying to, you know, care not only about wildlife, but also, you know, for my kids and, you know, just for like the stability of society, I think, you know, water safety and water infrastructure and conserving water and using it wisely is something that is so critically important that, you know, nobody really talks about it that much.
Absolutely. So I want us to close with a final film viewing in the few minutes we have left. But before we do, I'm going to ask you on rapid fire, what makes a good story in your perspective?
Well, for me, I can't like sleep at night.
Just
Like-
general?
Well, yes. Sorry, what did you ask? That may sound weird, but like to me, if it's a good story and it's something like we had to make Deep in the Heart. Like we had to make it because at that point in time, no one had done it before. And you may have not thought this way, but I was like, we got to do this thing now. It's almost like somebody else is going to figure this out and they're going to make it, which wasn't the case. But it's like this feels like such a good story. And maybe you don't get it right. Like maybe the product isn't perfect, but if it's a good enough story, like you have to tell it.
Okay. What makes a good story, Ben?
I think that whenever you make a film, you're entering into a relationship with the audience where they trust you with 90 minutes of their precious time that they're choosing to watch your work rather than Batman 77 and Spider-Man 42 and whatever.
Fast and the Furious 26.
Yeah, or Kim Kardashian does it again. And there's a level of trust there. That's like, hey, I am a thoughtful human being that I'm going to pay $10 to watch your movie. And I think to recognize that trust that they have in me as a film director, to give them something that is 90 minutes and to meet them where they're at in their life, and to recognize that they are a thoughtful, nuanced, they're not a stereotype, they're not a target audience, they are an individual that is, coming in to get engrossed in a world and a story that's outside of their daily life, and to, rise up to the responsibility of delivering something to them that I can, put my name behind as well as my teammates' name behind, and making sure that it's something that I think is productive. And I feel like there's so much media that just kind of tears people down, but something that is productive, that furthers creating a world that I want to see my kids inherit.
So there's this scene in Deep in the Heart, and this is where we're going to leave you today. And I've told you this before, Ben and Jake, where you, at the end, you reverse a film sequence and you travel back up the watershed and across our geographies, and you go through estuaries and rivers, back into the aquifer, back up into those amazing storms that you have up in the Panhandle. And I think that it is one of the most impactful sequences that I've ever seen about water, because it captures the scale, the connection, right? That hydrologic cycle that we all forget about. And so in a room full of water professionals that are working really hard and deep in the technical to try to explain the importance and the scale, I think it's striking to think about how a 3-minute film sequence can do more to convey a message about how it's all connected than any number of scientific reports. So before we show this sequence, I want to just say thank you. Thank you for making our job a little bit easier and telling really great stories about Texas water. And we look forward to seeing what happens. So with that, let's watch the final sequence. Let's watch that reverse sequence.
This seemingly alien world exists far from our daily consciousness. Yet it is connected in ways that we are just beginning to understand.
Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming and thanking Ben and Jide.